Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. It's day 2 in which officers of the BBC in India have had surveys done by the Income Tax Department. The BBC says that they're cooperating amidst repeated statements by many that the BBC is apparently a part of some sort of international conspiracy against India. BJP leaders have actually been saying that. Others, namely every reputed press guild in India, says that this is an issue that points to a reality in India of the misuse of government authorities to pressurize the media, government agencies. This is India's G20 year. As the world's largest democracy, should we be targeting independent media, thinking up bizarre conspiracy theories, or is there in fact truth to all of this? That's our first debate. Our second debate, the death of a scheduled caste student at IIT Bombay. It's the second recent such case of an IIT student dying. Is there systemic discrimination against scheduled caste students, as has been alleged, or does this not have to do with caste at all? And finally, later on the program, the mega Air India order for 470 jets worth a cool $7 to $8 billion. It's huge not just for India, but will trigger economic growth in Europe and the United States. This is certainly the power of a massive Indian company, but let's face it, the Tatas have bid big. Will Air India live up to their dreams? That's a special report I'll be bringing you closer to 10 p.m. But first, day 2 of what some people call raids, others will say it's just a survey, not a big deal, against the BBC. Joining us now, Satish Jacob, the former Deputy Chief of Bureau at the BBC Delhi, Aman Lekhi, the Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court, Rajat Sethi joins us, as also N. Ram, the Director of the Hindu Publishing Group. Satish Jacob, the point being mentioned by some is that the BBC has an agenda against India. The second part of this is that apparently you're being funded by China, has the BBC, which therefore works against Indian interests. These are some of the claims being made. How would you respond?
My response is, as far as this claim that BBC is being funded by China, I think it is ridiculous. The reason is China and Britain don't have a good relationship. And BBC being a leading news agency in England, how can they possibly get funds from China? China gives funds to Pakistan, not to BBC.
Okay.
That is one thing. Second thing is that BBC has made it very clear to the staff of their corporation in Delhi and Bombay that they must cooperate with the Income Tax Department in their searches. Now, what they are searching, nobody knows. They are saying tax evasion. They're saying they did not follow rules. Well, whatever they do. The thing is, I have worked for BBC for a long time. I am very proud of being a part of BBC at one time. I enjoyed my thing. We did lots of stories, and I was never, ever told by BBC to change my stories for anything. Whether they liked it or not, they broadcast whatever I said. You know, BBC is one organization, Vishnu, where the correspondent, if he files a story, there is no editing of that. It is in your voice. What you have recorded in your voice, that is broadcast.
Yeah, so it's the credibility of the journalist which is foremost, right? All right. Rajat Sethi, look, you know, a lot of people dislike the Modi documentary. A lot of others will say that, you know, there was nothing really new in it. But you can say what you want about that documentary series. But the moment we in our country, by which I mean the BJP and senior leaders, spokespersons of the party, leaders of the party, start saying that there is an international conspiracy against India, right? You know, you're typecasting the BBC and their work in a particular way. Then a few weeks after this documentary was banned, to have these surveys being conducted, isn't this bizarre? Is this the India that we want to portray?
Well, Vishnuji, the India that we want to portray should ideally be tax compliant, having organizations which don't.
No, but do you accept that? I mean, okay, fine. There may be tax issues, but the timing, Rajat. I mean, What are the optics here?
There are. Let me answer that question. The gist of your question. See, attributing larger than life moral pedestal to BBC is something that I have deep issues with. A very senior journalist here who's worked with the BBC was saying that there are no connections with BBC and China. Well, there have been Spectator reports wherein a detailed column has been listed where, in spite of Huawei being banned by both UK and by the US, BBC for its world affairs, for its outside UK affairs, they were seeking funding from, and they continue to seek funding from Huawei. That's a 2022 article, not a very old one. So one has to look into details of this to get to the bottom of the story. You can't just wish away that, okay, there is no China connect and live in a la-la land dreaming that international politics is so naive.
You broke the story of human rights violations against the Uyghur community in China?
Well, of course, I mean, if you look at the portrayal that BBC has been doing, I mean, there have been a lot of issues that were created when BBC interviewed the Chinese ambassador to the UK. You would have seen that. The kind of soft glove handling of that interview itself throws a lot of light. And there are political commentators who understand and cherry pick and can clearly draw.
But Rajat, I think you're missing the point of what my interjection, which is that they were very hard hitting in taking on China on human rights. You can just do a basic search and see their reports against
but there have been
human rights violations. Is it enough to say that Huawei is funding them and they've gone soft, right, on China and human rights? They haven't.
Well, Vishnuji, if you want to get into a verbal spat, I can't answer your questions here. Allow me at least a minute, okay? As I said, BBC London is structured very differently from the BBC World, all right? How has the BBC World taken money from Huawei, whereas the BBC London office not? These are structural issues. One has to get to the bottom of it. Now, there have been tax searches. Even the BBC's official commentary, the official statement that has come out is that they are cooperating with the Indian government. They haven't lamented on the fact that this is freedom of expression has been killed and all of that. These are the inferences which are being drawn out by the guilds. Yes. And by some of the media which are outside were not party to this. How do you know prima facie that there are no issues, no tax, no underlying issues related to tax evasion, wherein the government is trying to address?
All right.
So at least allow the story to pan out. Look at the assessment officer is the only person in the income tax who has the right sort of information, and not these media houses who are sitting outside India's geography.
So most media houses are sitting over here inside and criticizing. Okay, I got your point. Enram, let the tax department do its job. Who are we to say anything? How would you respond to that?
That is completely unacceptable, and these arguments by the apologists are just impenetrable. I heard Mr. Mahesh Jethmalani hold forth on this so-called China connection. Let me remind everyone that India has very deep trade relations with China, and in 2021, Vishnu, a very difficult year for India-China relations with the boundary, the tensions and conflicts. Two-way trade between India and China was $125 billion US, which made China the top trading partner for India. So just because you have trade relations or business relations with China, assuming they exist, doesn't tarnish you. And moreover, there's no connection between the documentary, which is on BBC Two, and that is entirely funded, those operations by the license fee system, and it's a not-for-profit organization regulated by Ofcom. And whatever is happening here, it's outrageous, it's over the top, it's indefensible, it's shameful that the income tax authorities have carried out a so-called survey. Now, if the reports that telephones were taken away of journalists by these guys, then that will be clearly illegal. Just read the Income Tax Act of 1961, the provisions, and so the power provided under the survey category does not permit that to happen. Okay. That's search, which is 132 section. So everything about it is bad, and it's not just the timing. The timing, of course, makes it very telling. But the point I'm making here is, in India, a certain message is projected for the bucks, and abroad, India wants to be known as a great champion of, or the government wants to be known as a great champion of democracy, and these two are in profound contradiction. They've scored. This is a comedy of blunders, of egregious blunders, undertaken by the government at a time when there's a very big story on the Adani Group, the Hindenburg report. Now, those matters, we don't know if the enforcement agencies, what are they doing about it? There's no transparency about it. Even the Supreme Court, they said regulatory matters will be given in a sealed cover. That's the government's contention. That's the elephant in the room. And today they are talking about some old stories. We don't know anything about whether there's a paper trail on these so-called concerns by the income tax authorities about these transactions.
Okay, so one sec. Let me get a quick reaction from Aman Lekhi. Mr. Lekhi, this is our G20 year. We are proud of our democracy. We want to obviously showcase this to the entire world. And then you've got something like this happening. I mean, what are we trying to, what is the message being sent?
Well, Vishnu, see, I find this penchant to, in some way, accumulate disapprobation and disfavor, or at least be indifferent to it, rather perplexing. Whatever be the merits of it and the justification the government perceives, the question is the timing, as you mentioned, discredits the process itself. And today we are not talking about what is euphemistically called surveys. We are talking about aspects unrelated to surveys, in which the entire purpose of having this survey undertaken is defeated, because popular perception is that this is an eyewash. It's basically intended to have an objective other than one which the Income Tax Act intends to achieve. But this is the politics of it. When I have a more serious objection to the legality of it, and the procedure is as important as the end which is towards which it is directed. And I personally feel that this is procedurally incorrect, and because it's procedurally incorrect, it is indefensible in law. And I say it's indefensible in law because whatever I read in the newspapers dealing with transfer pricing is dealt with in the Income Tax Act. There is a method in which this entire process is undertaken. As far as the material is concerned, the material in terms of the Act itself has to be provided regularly. Apart from the documents which have to be maintained, reports have to be submitted. On the basis of the material which is over there, the transfer pricing officer intervenes if he thinks it's necessary by issuing notice, whereafter the process commences and an assessment order is passed, which leads to an appeal. Now, that means whatever I read in the newspapers, if this process was underway, then in that event, the transfer pricing officer would be in the picture and the documents would be with them. If the documents are with them, what is the survey about? Because either you are not continuing with the process, or you have actually continued, or you are initiating in the first instance. So what is this whole survey about, firstly? Secondly, they call this a survey, and in terms of survey is concerned, survey is less intrusive than a search, because search is far more draconian in its approach, because the powers are far more plenary in a search. Now, in a survey, there are certain limitations. Whatever I read in the newspapers, there are certain seizures which are made. I do not know how or why those seizures are made, or whether seizures are in fact been made. Because if they were made, then it doesn't cease to be, it ceases to be a survey. It goes into the question of search, because seizure comes with search. Now, in this entire exercise, therefore, whatever may be the professed reason, what is actually lacking is legal legitimacy. Now, I am for a moment not talking about the BBC commentary. As far as I am concerned, I don't think BBC has got any right to talk about our Prime Minister or the affairs over here. We are quite capable of dealing with it. But whatever our reservation of the BBC commentary may be, the question is the Government of India deals with it. The Government of India has to be absolutely circumspect about the legal provisions under which it acts. Because the government is the best teacher. And if the government becomes lawless, lawlessness will become endemic. And that is something which you have to guard against.
Rajat, would you like to respond? The procedure may not be correct. Well, irrespective of whether you like the BBC or the documentary, that's a secondary point.
No, most certainly. And I think the government spokespersons should chime in and sort of provide that clarification. But to your point around search or survey, the survey officers, I mean, the income tax provides certain provisions where you can convert a survey into a search, provided there are certain conditions which are met during the process of the survey. That too is part of the income tax. And this is This is what I understand if the seizures, if at all they have been made. By the way, neither the income tax or the BBC have come out on record and said that the mobile phones...
But that's because, Rajat, on record information in today's India is very rare. It's always sources. And sources have said that phones were seized.
I mean, we don't know if the seizures have happened. I mean, this is a big assumption. So we should clearly say that assuming the seizures have happened, clearly there have been certain provisions which have been invoked to convert a survey into a search based on certain primary information which have been gathered on site. So there are legal provisions in the Income Tax Act which allows that. That's one. Second thing is certainly around the fact that timing, and you can go on and debate about it. Governments are well within the right to do that, and this is not the first time where the government has gone after media agencies and found out incriminating evidences wherein FCRA violations have been there. I mean, do you not stop that? Or do you wait for the right timing to sort of come in and take a muhurat and do these surveys and searches?
I think what the timing sends a certain question, sends a certain message, doesn't it? Well, there have been so many instances of searches.
Chor ki daadi mein tinka, there is a good Hindi saying.
Okay. Satish Jacob, the point Rajat mentions is that let's not question the timing. If the BBC has done something wrong, who is anybody to stop it? But do you believe that the larger issue is of timing because it's meant to send a message, irrespective of any irregularity which has been committed or illegality which has been committed?
Well, I'm afraid I think it's a question of timing. It is too obvious why the income tax survey or whatever you call it is taking place immediately after the BBC documentary was banned. It has something to do with that. And the government is saying that they have waited for a year or 2 years for this ignorance by BBC not complying with it. So suddenly now. But anyway, law is law and the government has every right to take these steps. But the thing is to make these comments that BBC must have done something. Maybe they've done something, but the BBC has made it very clear to the staff of their corporation in Delhi and Bombay that you must comply and cooperate with the authorities who are inspecting. They are not afraid and they are keeping quiet. There have been no comments in London by the government or the BBC about the income tax there. And here too, the staff is cooperating with the agency.
Mr. Ram,
I don't understand.
Mr. Ram, how would you agree that this is, it's not enough to say that the agencies act on their own time. The agencies know exactly what is happening. They understand the sensitivities and then they act. But the fact that they went ahead and acted, would you indicate that that shows an element of brazenness where a message is being sent around the world that we don't really care about what America, the UK or anybody else has to say? We have a problem and we will deal with it the way we want to. The rest of the world doesn't matter. Right? Is this the thinking over here?
Yes, Vishnu. But first, the point that Senior Counsel Mr. Lakey made is extremely important. It seems to be illegal. That's the issue that is raised. I've not heard it made so clearly before in other discussions of this question. And that has now become quite central, even if your procedure knocks it out, the legality of the proceedings, and that makes it even worse. Secondly, I'll cite an article by Mukul Keshavan in The Guardian where he says that Prime Minister Modi's struggle between being an anti-Muslim strongman and the global leader. These two are in profound contradictions. And so maybe they're projecting this for a domestic constituency, but it hits your international image profoundly.
It though, sir?
It's very, very brazen, as you said.
Does it, Mr. Ram? Yesterday, just to contradict that, yesterday we had our Prime Minister speak to the US President. We had our Prime Minister on a video call with Macron. We had Rishi Sunak later on praising India to the high heavens. So the point which would be made is that no, it doesn't matter. This BBC thing is too small. India is much larger economically and otherwise. So don't focus on this. Look at the larger picture. We are well beyond that. I think that's the argument which is made.
Western leaders have geopolitical ambitions and they want to come closer to the Indian government as a counterweight to China. There's this in all the papers, but that's not, and in fact, Rishi Sunak, I think it's quite disgraceful that he has not, imagine if an Indian institution of the BBC stature had been involved in an operation in the UK, I think this government would have immediately raised concerns. Let me give it to them. But the other way, it didn't happen, and that is to their discredit. But I'm talking about public perception. In editorials in the New York Times and the Guardian, in numerous discussions, I think this has taken India's international image, or rather this government's international image, has taken a huge hit. It puts our government in the category of Turkey's government, which may be elections, but they are autocratic, authoritarian, Hungary or Egypt under President Sisi, and so on. We are now seen as elective democracies, but in reality, the substance is more authoritarian. This is the perception that is gaining ground. Look at every index of press freedom in the world, put out by Reporters Without Borders. India ranked in their rating 150 out of 185. You can quarrel with the number, but it's really the quality of the ranking. It's so low, just above Pakistan, and so on. So in all these rankings, we are preparing very, very poorly. If you're hyper nationalistic, you'll say I don't care. But the point that Kesavan makes in this article is we care. The Indian government cares deeply about it. It wants to be both. It wants to have it both ways. Project this message for the domestic constituency, and then a completely opposite message or a contradictory message to the international. It will not work these days.
Aman Lekhi, has India lost the perception battle, or are we going to lose the perception battle internationally? The contradiction between how we want to be seen and how we will be seen.
Yes.
Well, I'm not too concerned about how we're seen internationally. The question here is what we are doing within our country, and if supposing law is used for the purpose of sending political messages, or there's a coded meaning to something which should be out in the open, this is something which should merit immediate criticism. I'm really not bothered about what the Americans think or what the English think. I'm concerned about how the Indians see themselves and what the Indians think. And as an Indian, as a right-thinking Indian, as a person who is concerned about the affairs of the country, I personally feel that because we have a legal system, we've got laws in place, we've got a manner in which we have to act, it behoves those who are going to be the upholders of this particular system and in fact be the enforcers of the system to act in a manner becoming of the managers of the system. If the government is a product of laws and has to act in terms of the laws, and being a product of laws to act in terms of the laws, it cannot possibly disregard the laws. And if there is a procedure, the procedure must be followed. Whether we like it or not, it has to be complied with. We have issues with the BBC documentary, deal with it. But you cannot possibly deal with the BBC documentary in a manner law does not permit. This kind of, as I said, political messaging through legal means is not something which merits approval. You mentioned timing. Timing is a very important facet over here. What it suggests is, if supposing this is going on for a period, it can be seen that the government could have looked the other way if supposing a particular event had not happened. Because if whatever has happened is after that event, that means the government has acted not because it was not aware of what was wrong, but it felt the need to act because of some utterly independent and unrelated incident. Now, because it is acting on the basis of independent, unrelated incident, the integrity of the process is undermined. And the integrity of the process is undermined, the process ceases to exist, because in the integrity of the process, as much as in the substance of it, lies the worth of law.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. We're going to continue with this. I'm now joined by Mahesh Jethwalani, the senior lawyer and MP. Thanks very much for being with us, Mr. Jethwalani. A lot of people say, in fact, just about every editors guild in this country says that this is all being done to harass the media, that, the parts of the government, institutions of the government are being deliberately misused to push a political agenda. How would you respond to those points?
Vishnu, look, I mean, a lot of people may be right that the optics aren't good on this, and they are entitled to make their own inference. But, I think it was a long time coming, and maybe this has been the trigger because BBC has is a repeat offender. There's a history of, anti-India propaganda being propagated by them. So, and now after their financial links with Chinese state-owned companies have become legion, completely in the public domain, and both the extent and the quantum are quite alarming, right? Almost amounts which suggest that, they're willing to be mouthpieces, unless you have integrity or no obligations of a extremely rare kind.
No, but sir, how did that work?
Are bound to be made that you are no more than a
But
mouthpiece.
Mr. Jethmalani, they broke these stories of human rights violations against the Uyghur community in Western China. So where they get the money is one issue, but their journalism isn't compromised.
Well, what I'm told, if you go into the some of the articles which I've attached to my tweets and which are there in the public domain, I'm not asking you to go into my tweets, but if you look at it, the parent organization of the BBC, right, is the one that dealt with the exposure, and with the exposure of the atrocities and the brainwashing and the mind control of the Uyghur community in Shangjing. But it is that parent organization which did it. What they are saying is that this Storyworks, right, which is that overseas entity, where it's registered, etc., I don't know, and which gets a lot of funding from the Chinese, have actually done something that the very people we have accused of repressing and committing human rights violations in Shangjing province, right? Those are the same people you are taking money from. That's the complaint not only of the UK establishment, but within the UK organization, between the London-based organization, which the articles which are in the public domain say are the organization which exposed the story on the Uyghurs, while the overseas entity, Storyworks, is publishing pro-Chinese and
no. But sir, what have they published which is
anti-Indian propaganda?
What have they published which is pro-Chinese that has worked against Indian interests?
In the past, apart from denigrating Prime Minister Modi in the latest incident, that's the culmination, right, on the Gujarat riots, in spite of him getting a clean chit after a searching inquiry by our judiciary. It's also a slur on our judiciary that you do this when examination according to Indian laws and Indian evidence acts, right, have given a clean chit to Modi. In the past, there have been cases where you've completely denigrated the Indian army, right? You've accused them of genocide in Jammu and Kashmir. You've published a map of India minus the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So they are repeat offenders, and there are many more instances I can bring to your notice.
But sir, your argument is that they're doing this on the basis of China. In other words, some sort of a conspiracy between the BBC and China targeting India. We are the world's largest democracy, Isn't it a bit far-fetched to make this association?
No, I mean, the Sunday Guardian has written an article that has repeatedly been saying there's a Sino-Wahhabi axis that is very active against India.
Right.
It may sound far-fetched. Why is it far-fetched? I mean, are you saying that the Chinese are not capable of this kind of surveillance, this kind of spying, this kind of propaganda in the country?
But do you seriously think that the BBC is doing this in collusion with the Chinese? Are they genuinely capable of doing this?
No, but we are not that weak a nation. That's the extent of their money power. That's the extent of their money power and the astuteness of their surveillance and spying techniques. And they find fault lines in India. They find fault lines in the countries in which they want to create them. And they play on those fault lines. All divisions in those societies.
Okay, sir,
they play on them. Now, I'm not saying that everything that happens in India, any fault line in India, is inevitably Chinese originated. But a lot of it is.
But the bottom line, sir, do you believe that agencies in our country are being used to teach the BBC a lesson? What are the optics over here?
Vishnu, I want to correct you. I said some people may think that the optics are wrong. I don't, right? It's arguable it is, right? I'm not saying that they are not wrong in holding that view. That's up to them, right? I tend to think that an organization like this had its dues long coming, and the government of India now is conducting through the income tax department only nobody's been arrested. It's only a survey at the moment. All right. Now, I would like to assume that legality, other people may have a less charitable view about our investigating agencies. I would like to assume that the Income Tax Department in this case is acting bona fide, unless somebody shows me, because that's a presumption in law, right? People may not like that presumption of law, but as a lawyer, there's a presumption in law that our agencies act according to the Constitution and according to the law. So I would like to believe that they have material on the basis on which they have conducted this survey. If anybody has evidence to the contrary, barring the usual anti-agency rhetoric, right, I'm willing to hear it, and if credible, believe it.
Sir, do you want the BBC personally out of India?
I'm reserving judgment on that. I'm reserving saying anything on that. But if this gets murkier than it is, there may be a case for that. So we are still in an investigative realm at the moment.
So one final question, and you know, the broader issue over here. We have a Prime Minister who's perceived to be very strong internationally. He spoke to Macron yesterday in a press conference, Biden yesterday, Rishi Sunak praised India for all the Air India stuff, which is why the key question remains, why do we need to, as a country, react to a documentary that's not really thrown out any new evidence on Modi and the Gujarat riots? We go and ban it. Now this raid and all or whatever, surveys are on right now. Should we be reacting in our G20 year in this manner?
Because A, it's vituperative. It tries to destabilize and create Hindu-Muslim divisions again. It's trying to exploit a fault line, something which BBC does quite often.
All right. Well, sir, thanks very much, for being with us, Mr. Jethmalani. This is a huge debate. 2 days of searches or surveys, if you want to use that word, are now over. And let's see what finally happens.